Hello, I'm Jonathan Chevalier, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar on getting started with data. In terms of today's speakers, I'm going to be chairing, and I'm the CEO of Charity Digital, and I'd like to first of all introduce Dulcie Vousden. Dulcie is the data science lead at DataKind UK, so she's a real data expert, and I'm delighted to have her here.
Thanks, Jonathan, and I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm excited to learn more about the heritage sector. And as Jonathan said, I'm the data science lead at DataKind UK. We're a charity that aims to build the capacity of charities in the social sector to use data science.
Thanks, Dulcie. And then I'd also like to welcome Carmen Talbot. Carmen is the project manager of Heritage Digital and the Heritage Alliance, and she's going to be bringing that whole heritage element to today's session, and she'll be joining us in the Q&A in particular to answer any heritage related questions that come up there.
Hi, like Jonathan said, I'm the project manager of this very exciting National Lottery Heritage funded programme. I've worked in this sector for the last 7 years between the Southwest and London, working with data in collections, community heritage and communications. Too many communities there. Really excited to join you later in the Q&A.
Thanks, Carmen. Before we move into the bulk of today's content, just want to say a few more words to introduce the program, the Heritage Digital program. Hopefully you've all actually seen our website, because that's how you actually signed up for today's session. But in terms of what the program is about, it's really focused on raising the digital skills of people working in heritage. We've got a really inclusive definition of what we mean by that. So all sorts of different heritage organisations and all sorts of different roles as well. The program is totally free of charge because it's funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and we're going to be producing around 8 webinars in total. This is the second. We had one recently last week on the whole digital communications. We'll be producing a number of digital guides. We're going to have some digital days and also workshops which will dive deeper on specific topics. Because of the obvious corona restrictions at the moment, we're starting off by delivering all virtually, but we're really hoping that in the new year we'll actually be able to come out and meet people in the regions as well, though obviously that will be determined by the current situation at that point in time. But nonetheless, we're really keen to plough on and do everything we can virtually in the short term as well. There are 4 partners within the consortium, which is Heritage Digital. So there's the Media Trust, who presented last week's session on digital communications. There's us, Charity Digital, and we're focusing on the digital tech stream. So that includes things like data, CRM, and a range of other topics as well. We've got Naomi Korn, who then focus on the whole subject of data protection and digital rights. And then the Heritage Alliance as well, who are managing the whole program and ensuring that this is deeply tied into the overall needs of the heritage sector. And if you want to stay informed about the program, do please drop in from time to time on our website, heritagedigital.org. If you've registered as well, we'll send you emails to keep you updated on what's going on, because what we're also doing, as well as adding our own original content, we're also looking for other things that we think are useful to the sector, and we'll be putting those up on the site as well. So that's a little bit just to introduce the program. I've got a few housekeeping points that I'll very quickly run through. So we'll have about 45 minutes of presentation today, and then we'll have 15 minutes for Q&A and advice. If you'd like to raise a question, then just click on the Q&A box. You can do that at any time. So as soon as the question occurs, we'll then store them up, and I'll actually then run through those questions at the end and encourage and invite the speakers to come in and comment on those. Do please also use the chat box to talk with each other and sort of share your own knowledges and insights. We think that kind of that peer-to-peer sharing can be really useful as well. So do please take advantage of that. We've got facilitators from Charity Digital on hand as well. If you've got any problems, raise those through the chat box. We're recording the webinar, but not the actual chats or what's happening at your end. So just what the speakers are going through and the slides, and that will be made online within the next week as well, so that you can go back and reference that after the event, and also maybe invite your colleagues who haven't been able to join us today to participate and benefit from that as well. Also, as we go through this, do please feel free to tweet using the hashtag Heritage Digital. We're really keen to get the word out about what we're doing in this program. As I say, it's free, so we want as many people as possible to be involved with this. So that's all I want to say by way of introduction. I'd like now to hand over to Dulcie, who will lead us through the presentation part of this webinar.
Thanks, Jonathan. Again, I'm really excited to be here and also to learn from you and Carmen about how we can support the heritage sector. So the goal of today's session is to try to answer the question, what is data science? And to give you examples of how data can be used to try to understand and evaluate your organization's impact. And in doing that, we're going to try and give you some practical tips to get started, including introducing you to the data maturity framework and how this might be a useful tool for you to build your organization's data capabilities. Introducing you briefly to some frameworks that can be used to think about how your data is collected and used responsibly. And then lastly, talking about some free or low cost advice and tools available to guide your data strategy and help upskill your staff or yourself. So first, I wanted to find out a little bit about who's here and tell you a little bit about DataKind. So DataKind UK is a charity. Our aim is basically to build the data science capacity within social change organizations. And so for us, that includes charities, often service delivery charities, but really any organization working within the social sector. So social enterprises, we often work with local government and organizations like Citizens Advice. And we've worked with the sort of big and small. We've worked with the Oxfams of the world, but then we've also worked with smaller organizations, including places like the Woodland Trust, who are a small kind of conservation trust. And I should say as well that we're able to do this work because of our large community of data science volunteers. So we are a small staff team, but we have a network of hundreds of industry data scientists who want to give back their time and skills to the social sector. And as a result, the majority of the programs that we run are actually free. So now I wanted to get a bit of a sense of who's here. So I think if we could launch the poll, we're going to ask you, what type of organization do you work or volunteer for? And hopefully we've included the relevant categories for you here, but there is a none of the above at the bottom. So please go ahead and tell us where you're coming from today. All right, hopefully everyone's had a chance to answer that poll. And if you could just show us the results. All right, okay, so it looks like the majority of folks are coming from historic building or monument organizations, about 30% there. We've also got a strong contingent from the museum archive collection, about 22% there. Some community heritage organizations, a few people from archives. Interestingly, nobody here yet from a library. One person holding up the fort for the maritime transport and industrial heritage organizations. And then also several folks who weren't in any of these categories. So I would welcome you to tell us in the chat where you're coming from today. That'd be great. So what is data science? So data science is really, to me, just the 21st century term for using tools to gain insight and knowledge from your data. So data science can be really useful to challenge or confirm your existing assumptions or to enable you to deliver better services. And for me, like, data science has been something that's been happening for hundreds of years, but the key difference is that now we have computer technology that enables us to analyze greater quantities of data and in more sophisticated ways. So the tools used in data science tend to be a combination of the kind of typical maths and stats tools that are used in traditional research, along with programming skills from computer science. And again, the difference between kind of traditional reporting and data science is that you kind of want to test a hypothesis or a hunch or try to make a prediction. And another really key ingredient is domain expertise. And so for us, whenever we're working with an organization, we really rely on the organizational partner to provide that knowledge of their audience and the sector they're working in. For us, you can't do data science with that expertise. So how can heritage organizations, big and small, get more from their data? For me, I think the best way to understand is with some examples. So when thinking about how to get started with data, we think that the best way is to think about your desired outcome. And so this might tie into your organization's mission, perhaps into your theory of change, if that's something that you have, or it could relate to a particular project. And so one resource that is helpful for thinking about outcomes is actually from the Heritage Fund, who outline 9 outcomes for projects that they're funding. So perhaps for you, an outcome that you are hoping to achieve is that a wider range of people will be involved in heritage. Perhaps it's that people are going to develop new skills or improve their well-being, or perhaps you're looking at the surrounding local economy and hoping to boost visits to that area. Once you've established the outcomes that you're hoping to achieve, you can then think about what sort of evidence you would need to demonstrate this outcome. And this allows you to find your question or your sets of questions. Another way that we often ask this to help guide the thinking of organizations is to say, what information or what 3 pieces of information, if you had it, would make your job substantially easier. So for example, if your outcome that you're trying to achieve is that you would like a wider range of people to be involved in heritage, you need to first ask, who is our audience now? How is this changing? What sort of demand are we seeing for different programs or services that we're offering? If you want to understand or demonstrate that people are developing new skills, you're essentially asking, how effective are our programs and services? And likewise, if you're looking at things like the local economy, you're looking again at impact. So you need some sort of measure of how things were before and how things changed as a result of your program. The next step, of course, is then asking, do you have the data that you need to answer that question? And so to illustrate this, I'll share a short story from the Woodland Trust. So we worked with them on a short project, but I have to say they've really taken this in stride and built on this work. So the Woodland Trust is an organization who campaign to protect ancient woods. And one of their programs involves citizen science. Here, communities are invited to record seasonal observations of nature into a database. And so people might track things like the first appearance of different species, like a butterfly shown here, or the location of particular plants, animals. And the desired outcome for Woodland Trust was that they wanted to increase participation in this program, making sure that the areas that they wanted to track were tracked and that more people were involved. And so to evaluate whether they were achieving this outcome, they realized that they needed to ask who is participating, who isn't participating, what are they recording and where? Where aren't they recording? Are they getting out to those Scottish Isles to record species there? And so the data that they had to look at this was demographics on who the recorders were, including whether they were members of the Woodland Trust, and then also a lot of observation data. So the time of year, season, species, location of where all of these observations were made. And so using this data, they have now built this lovely interactive dashboard, which I would encourage you to explore, where people can see different species and how they're being recorded in the UK. So this dashboard allows you to choose the species you're interested in, the event, so first or last recording, and then the years of interest. And on this map, each dot is an observation by a person. And this is useful for them because it shows them, which bits of the country are not being recorded for certain species, which maybe they can target their recruitment of citizen scientists to those areas. It also allows them to evaluate how their program is growing over time. So this was just one example of data use, but more generally, we found that most data science projects that come to us can be broken down into one of a few categories. So the three categories that are widely applicable seem to be trying to understand your audience. So that could be, you know, who are the visitors to our museum, who are our donors, who are our website visitors, especially now when a lot of the audience is becoming a digital audience. That is something that you might want to investigate. The second would be understanding demand. So when and where is demand highest? What is popular? How has that been changing? And then evaluating your services and programs. So what's working? Are we meeting the outcomes that we desire to meet? So this just brings us to our second poll. I'm keen to see your thoughts here. So we're going to ask you now, how are you currently using data? And please feel free to choose any and all that apply. So whether you're using data to monitor your social media interactions, whether you're trying to monitor your website or digital traffic through, say, an app, if you're monitoring your in-person audiences, if you want to evaluate audience experiences, if you're actually tracking like how audiences or customers move through your organization, whether that's how they transition from donor to visitor, or whether that's how they literally move through a physical space. Perhaps you're using data to keep track of a museum collection. And then I imagine that most organizations are also using data routinely for kind of business and finance needs. So I'll give you a second to fill in that survey. All right. Okay, perhaps in response to what I hear was a wonderful seminar the other day, it seems that 84% of you are already using data to monitor your social media. And likewise, a lot of people, over 2/3 are using data to monitor digital visitors. About half using data for monitoring in-person audiences and keeping track of business and finances. But fewer people looking at monitoring audiences or customer journeys, and only again about just under half evaluating audience experiences using data. So we'll tell you some stories, and maybe that will inspire you to build on your practices already. So now I'm going to tell you a little story about each of those types of using data. And the first one I wanted to tell you about is highlighting a project by Visit England. We were not involved in this, but I thought this was a really interesting example. So Visit England are, of course, the national tourist board for England, and they had a hypothesis that different people want different things from their holiday destinations, which makes sense. And so they wanted to see if their audience could be segmented into different groups. And so this isn't just sort of sorting people into different buckets like age band or income, but they wanted to look at multiple features to try to see how they cluster together. So they looked at what people like to do, demographics about who the travelers are, and then their motivations. So I was thinking about those kind of online quizzes you take that tell you what your dream holiday might be, especially in these times. And they found that combining these features allowed them to split their audience into 5 segments. So I won't tell you all of these, but they found that their largest audience was what they called the country-loving traditionalist. So these are folks who tend to be child-free, have traditional values. They are interested in kind of high-quality, secure accommodation. But they also had a smaller proportion who are these sort of fuss-free value seekers, is what they called them. So this was interesting because one of the features of this group would kind of dictate how you might want to approach them for marketing. So they found that this segment tended to be less digitally active, they tended to be less likely to engage in social media, and they tended to be less likely to book something online. So by kind of segmenting their audience into these different categories, they could think about how to design programs and marketing and services to better suit these different segments of their population. And if you're interested in exploring this type of analysis with your own data, you can certainly use your own data to see if there's a natural segmentation or split. Or you can also use tools like the audience agency has an audience spectrum to see if pre-existing segments fit well with your audience. So in addition to understanding the segments of your audience, you could also use data to understand how they're participating. So are they participating online, in person? What is a typical visitor journey? I don't have time today to go into the details, but you can certainly look at like a customer journey mapping, understanding how an audience member moves through your organization. And then, of course, you can look at how a new program, whether it's advertising or, if it's a targeted outreach to, say, a particular demographic like youth, how it affects their participation. So the next big category of data use is understanding demand. And so one nice example is from the Ordnance Survey, and they wanted to understand where the most popular walking routes were in the UK, so that they could provide more content for these areas. And I don't know if they use this as well to promote the less popular areas, but perhaps that would be another use case. So for this, they used data on the number of times different maps were downloaded. And in this image here, the density of the color, so basically how purple it is, shows you how popular the area was. And so I don't know if you want to use this information for planning your post-coronavirus getaway, but the most popular walking route was in Snowdonia. Also a lot of foot traffic in the Lake District and the Peak District, perhaps unsurprisingly. But what was kind of interesting and amusing in this data set is that the most popular endpoint where most routes ended was this intersection in Fairholmes. And I think what this illustrates is that sometimes answering one data question brings you more data questions. We don't know why this little intersection in Fairholmes is the most popular. Doesn't seem to be a particularly good pub, but just sometimes data can bring you more questions than answers. So in terms of understanding demand, we would encourage you to think about using data to understand when the best time might be to offer your services, how a marketing campaign may or may not have increased demand, when the busiest times of the day or year might be, and then also a maybe more advanced approach would be, can we predict visitor traffic? And this would be helpful for allowing you to potentially staff appropriately. And then lastly, data can be used to evaluate your programs and services. So you might want to know what parts of our museum does the audience enjoy, or are people gaining skills as a result of our training program? And so this is an example figure from the National Trust, which shows the percentage of people that rated the service that they received as excellent. And what's nice about this is that if you use consistent standards, or what are often referred to as kind of key performance indicators, then you can track your year-on-year progress and see how you're doing based on the same metric. This can also be enhanced if you combine it with the segmentation that we talked about earlier. So this is an example from the heritage sector, but from an organization that we've worked with. And I think the understanding is kind of global. So this is with a Welsh charity called Clymai, who work to reduce youth homelessness. And they had a hunch that some of their programs were not working very well for young men, especially those who'd been in care. And this was who they were trying to target with their program. So what they did was they segmented their program results by type of user. So I'm going to draw your attention to the left side of this figure, where you can see the percentage of clients colored by the overall impact level of the program. So the green shows you that these folks had an excellent outcome, whereas the pink is a lesser outcome. And the female participants who were not youth offenders, not care leavers, about 75% of those had an excellent impact level. But if we look to the right side, we see that males who were both youth offenders and care leavers, only about 30% had an overall excellent outcome. So looking at your data this way could allow you to see who your program is working for and who it might not be working for. In the same way as looking at indicators of just enjoyment, you could use this approach to ask whether participants have learned new skills, whether your audience's well-being has maybe changed as a result of your project, whether your audience has an improved understanding of heritage, and again, whether your programs are working well for some groups but not for others. So in this next bit of the talk, I wanted to tell you a few of our kind of top tips for getting started, because I know that that can sometimes be a big hurdle. So over the years, we've assembled our kind of handful of top tips for organizations working within anywhere in the social sector. So our first tip is maybe counterintuitive, which is that it's not really about the data. And I'll tell you a bit more about what I mean there. We also encourage you to understand your organization's data maturity, embed responsible data uses from the outset. Just be conscious of starting where you are, invest in your people, your tools, and recognize that change can be incremental, and that's okay. Try to make the case. If you are not on the leadership team, sometimes the most helpful thing you can do is get a little nugget of insight and make the case to senior leadership. And then we encourage you to use, there's a lot of pro bono support out there. So it's not really about the data is our first tip. So we find that there can be kind of a lot of tech solutionism, not just in tech. So a lot of the time when we're working with organizations, they struggle to define the problem that they need. So they might be aware of data science techniques out there, know that they have a lot of data, they want to make data a priority, but it can be hard to start without a problem definition, because you want to know what you're optimizing for. So we really like this framework by Eddie Copeland for thinking about whether you can address this problem with data. And this framework encourages you to think, like, what specific problem would you like to solve? And what would you do differently if you had better information? So perhaps you're saying to yourself, if only I could predict which of our heritage homes would be, or monuments are the most popular, I could find volunteers to staff appropriately. Or perhaps you're saying, if only I could show that the involvement of youth in our conservation program is increasing the knowledge of this sector, then I could get some funding to promote it further. And so we really recommend working through this 4-step process when thinking about data. So what problem would you like to solve? What would you actually do differently? What action would you take if you had better information? Sometimes it can be very helpful to think, what would you need to see on a screen to make this decision? And I would encourage you to actually, take the step of drawing what you would want to look at to make that decision. And then you can think about, do you have the data to actually do this? Our next tip is to try to understand your organization's data maturity. So data maturity is the journey towards improvement and increased capability in using data. And it's a framework that we developed in partnership with Data Orchard. Since then, there have been other organizations, including the Digital Culture Compass, who've developed similar tools, all of which can be a great way to assess where you are on your digital and data journey. And so for us, we identified 7 components to an organization's data maturity. This includes leadership, skills, culture, data, tools, uses, and analysis. So you might find that you have a lot of data that's well stored and lots of tools. Perhaps you already have, a Tableau license in-house, but you have very low buy-in from your senior leadership. They don't have, this isn't a priority. Or perhaps you have a lot of buy-in, but the ways in which you are currently using data is limited to only fundraising. So on both of these websites, you can go and kind of get a bit of a snapshot of where your organization is at in terms of data maturity, and then that can perhaps guide you, because sometimes the next best thing for your organization isn't necessarily getting a lot of fancy analytics, but investing in the culture of the organization. Our third tip is to embed responsible data use from the outset. So I know in the news there's a lot of kind of corporate stories of irresponsible data use, but sadly the social and heritage sector are not immune either. And so by responsible data, we don't just mean GDPR and data protection, though Naomi Korn have some really great resources on this. But we also want to think about ethical data use. So two really useful frameworks for starting this conversation are shown here, the Sense About Science and .everyone's consequence scanning. So unfortunately, there's no kind of checklist that I can tell you to make sure that the way you're using data is responsible, but there are some questions that you can ask yourself to start the conversation. And this can include, where does the data come from? Was it collected with informed consent? What assumptions are being made? So are you assuming that certain folks are included in the data? Perhaps you're you're gathering data from cell phone or app use, and you're therefore kind of excluding folks who don't have access to that technology. And so that's fine, but you just need to know what your data isn't and isn't counting. The other kind of things to think about are, what if a model is wrong? What might the unintended consequences be? So this is more a factor if the model might be used to, say, ration services, or prioritize some people over another, or give some people funding and others not. But just to be open and transparent about what those consequences might be. Our next tip is just to recognize that everybody is on a journey, and you want to kind of find the thing that helps you where you're at, not where you want to be. So in terms of tools, there's a lot of kind of no-code dashboarding or analytics tools out there. And TechSoup, in partnership with Charity Digital, provide a lot of the software free to charities. So Tableau, Power BI, and Data Studio are great dashboarding tools. Time to Spare is a newer CRM that I'm aware of that has some built-in analytics for small charities. I also wanted to highlight two no-code mapping tools. So BatchGeo is really useful. It allows you to basically drag in an Excel sheet, and if you have postcode or geographical information, it will visualize where those map to in the world. If you have volunteers or staff who are keen to upskill, I would encourage you to point them towards Coursera or edX. There's two popular open source code options, which are R and Python. Open source means that it's free and that there's a community to support people. And I would just encourage you to try it out. A lot of folks who are professional data scientists were self-taught. There's no reason you can't do it either. And if you're very keen, I've learned that UCL also has a new master's degree in data science and sustainable heritage. One tool that I just wanted to highlight quickly was this tool from the Audience Finder. It's called Audience Finder. It's from the Audience Agency, and the majority of their functionality is free. So this tool allows you to visualize where in the UK different audiences are. So this uses, they identify several different audience segments. But the one shown here is what they call their commuterland culture buffs. And it can show you where in the UK those folks are, which might be able to help you find new audiences or target your services. Second to last tip is that just to try to make the case. So often we get organizations who think that they need to have a full organization overhaul and data strategy. And in our experience, it's the most helpful if you take one bit of data, show something useful, find a kind of nugget of insight, and use that to inform your staff, your volunteers, your coworkers, your funders. So I think in this case, if you're funded by Heritage Fund, they seem to be quite on board with data use, so that's great. But just do something small and useful and build from there. And then lastly, I would encourage you to make the most of pro bono support networks. So There's a lot of networks out there that provide free or low-cost support. I'll tell you a bit about our programs, but just to highlight a few others. So Coalition for Efficiency and Inspiring Impact are two organizations that are really great at helping you think of theory of change or measuring impact and evaluation. What Works Wellbeing have some really useful resources on measuring well-being and how you might think about including well-being metrics in your survey design. Some other organizations that are kind of similar to us are Pro Bono Economics and Statisticians for Society, and Pro Bono Operational Research, who also offer kind of semi-pro bono consulting. I would also encourage you to explore Digital Pathways, which has some resources for the heritage sector. Visit Britain, Visit England, Visit Scotland, and then Wales as well. They have some useful resources in terms of estimating when sites are likely to be busy and maybe predicting traffic. Lastly, the UK Data Service has a lot of open data, including kind of visits on data on museum visits and that sort of thing. And I would also encourage you to explore apprentices. So both White Hat and Corndell are organizations that might be able to give you some data support via an apprentice. So lastly, I'll just tell you a little bit about what we offer, because as I said, most of our programs are free, and our aim is to increase the capacity of organizations, social change organizations in general, to get the most out of their data. So the way that we do this is ranging from light touch support to year-long projects. On the lightest end of things, we have our data therapy or office hours. So these are monthly, and they're 1-hour chats. Anybody can book a free 1-hour chat with a data expert to talk about anything, whether it's strategic or technical. So in practice, what you can do is just go to our website and fill in a form with your question, and we'll match you up with somebody with the relevant expertise. So this could be anything from, how do I get started with data collection? What should I collect and how? Or it might be, I am stuck with this Excel macro. We've gotten any and all in between. The bulk of the work that we do are our DataDives, and these are short 2 to 3 month exploratory projects that we do, again, for free with any social change organization. So this is, if you're a charity or a community interest company or social enterprise, all fair game. And the aim of this is to test some of your initial hunches and give you a bit of an exploration of your data. So what we do is we work with you for about 6 to 8 weeks to define the question set, clean up your data, and then when we bring together about 20 to 30 industry data scientists over a weekend to explore those questions with you. Sometimes this can then be transformed into our longer term projects, which are our DataCorps. And these are 6 to 12 month projects where we try to kind of operationalize something. So for example, we worked with an organization to help them predict client need. So they wanted to be able to intervene a bit earlier. So we helped them develop a predictive model of who was at risk of becoming dependent on their services. These are a bit longer, as I said, about 6 to 12 months. And then lastly, if any of you out here are data scientists or training to be data scientists working in the social sector, we have an organization called the Social Data Society. And this is a community that meets every 6 weeks to basically build support for each other and learn new skills. We recognize that a lot of data folks in the social sector are islands or one of only a few in their team. And so we wanted to provide a space for them to learn from each other, and we bring in external speakers as well. So if that sounds like the right fit for you, definitely please get in touch. And in general, I would say if you have any questions that are not on our website, absolutely send me an email, and we'd be happy to help. So I think with that, we are good to move on to questions, Jonathan.
Good. Yes, thank you very much for that, Dulcie. We've covered a huge amount of content there. We've got loads of questions coming in as a result. So it's really good that we've got some time to drill into those. And what we'll aim to do is really try and get through, well, we'll actually try and get through all of the questions. We like not to leave any unanswered. Just before we go to the questions, I want to mention we will be sending out an evaluation form after this. We're really keen to have your feedback to understand the impact that we're having through these sessions. So do please give us your feedback. It also helps us to understand how we can tune this program as we move forward as well. So that will be coming out within the next 24 hours as well for you to fill in. Let's go to the first question. So I'm gonna start a fairly simple question here, but I think it's really important to deal with the basics before we move into more complexity as well. And this is, could you explain, Dulcie, what you actually mean by a dashboard tool?
Yes, sorry for that. That is a very great question. So a dashboard tool is kind of, I think of it as like an interactive report. So there are tools out there that allow you to have kind of a few key figures or statistics, like maybe you have a chart showing number of visitors each day, and that will get constantly updated. So dashboard tool is a way of taking several of those pieces of information and having it all in one place so that you and others can visualize it at once. And some common dashboarding tools, which are, again, either kind of free or discounted for charities, are Tableau and Power BI, and these don't require any kind of coding skills.
Good, excellent. And this is a really good question, actually. It's about sources of data. So how do you get data from non-technology users to make sure that you're not excluding them? What's the best way to actually set about collating this?
Yeah, so I think that depends a little bit on your use case, and happy to chat with this person directly, either individually or in office hours if they like. So one way that I've seen used in practice is in museums. Rather than having people like fill in a survey online, I'm the kind of person who will always answer the person at the door with the survey on the iPad. So you can approach people rather than with a physical paper survey. If you approach people with a digital option and read through it with them, that can be a way to make sure that you're not excluding people on the basis of accessibility, but you are at the whim of the of your audience there. So I think that can definitely be a strategy to sort of get your in-person audience.
Yes. Okay, brilliant. We've got a few questions that relate back to some of the content in the presentation as well. So I'd like to dig into those. This is from Mimi, who's asking, could you explain again about where the idea of the 5 segments of visitors comes from? So this is, I guess, with the country-loving traditionalists, the fuss-free value seekers. So where that comes from and where the data comes from. And I guess there's also a general question which sits behind this, like if you're taking any set of data, how do you actually segment that into what are useful segments at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So I'll start with the sort of simplest case. So often I think when looking at data, people will be used to looking at how many people from your audience are in different age bands or maybe in different regions of the country. But you can also try to group different features together so that you can create a kind of, you can think of it like a prototypical person. So what Visit England did with this is that they took a whole bunch of features of a person. So if you think of yourself as a person, like it could be your age, it could be your gender, it could be your family status, whether you have kids or not, it could be where you live. But then also things like what your interests are, perhaps how much money you tend to spend on accommodation, how far you're willing to drive to see an attraction or book a holiday. All of those kind of bits of our personality that make us who we are can be combined together, and you can try to figure out or discern with computer models which bits of information make a difference. So in this case, they found that they could basically combine information about the user's demographics, what their interests were, to separate people into 5 general buckets. That's not to say that you couldn't just as well group them into 6 buckets, but with the model, you can essentially ask, does making more groups help me? Am I identifying a slightly different audience than with 6 groups than I am with 5 groups? So basically what they did is they tried adding in different bits of information and tried varying the number of groups to see what features about people were helpful and what number of groups were helpful in terms of separating their audience best. Does that make sense? Do you want me to clarify anything there, Jonathan?
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
If people want to ask any more questions, they can put those in the Q&A as well to kind of build on that. But I want to keep moving through some of the others as well. So Clarissa says, super useful presentation, thank you. Could you go through the data maturity framework in a little more detail? She particularly is curious about how the different aspects should be measured quantitatively or qualitatively.
Yes, and actually I can share, when we share the slides, I can share a link to the one that we use. So the data maturity framework is a sort of tool that we developed with Data Orchard to help us understand basically how to help people best and how to help them along their data journey. So as I said, there were several different facets, and what we do for each aspect is ask the organization to consider things like, under uses, to what extent do you use data for the different purposes, including recording your activity or work with clients or visitors, measuring the service quality or performance, measuring your outcomes or impact evaluation, and in the context of a charity, evidencing the need or problem that you need to seek. So for each of those domains of data use, we sort of check yes or no, are you doing that? And then we obviously allow everyone for comments. In the case of leadership, we ask questions around how much would you agree or disagree with statements like data and analytics is a major organizational priority. We have people with data analytics experience in our leadership, questions like that. So I think perhaps the best thing is if I share the link to that, and then there's a free kind of taster version online, and we have our own that I'm happy to share as well, that you can trial out and see. But the idea is that you can identify areas for growth and try to invest in those domains.
Good, that's great. Yeah, I've seen the data maturity tool as well, and it's a very useful tool. So I encourage people who are interested to actually look into that some more. And as Dulcie says, we will put that link online when we publish the presentation in the coming week. Let's go to another question now, and want to start dipping a bit more into some of the heritage specifics as well. Question here is, from your experiences, what is the most impactful action we should start doing or do better in the heritage sector? I'm thinking this needs, from Dulcie's viewpoint, definitely to be a data question only. Carmen might want to give a broader perspective on it as well. I don't know if Carmen maybe would like to start on this one, and then Dulcie can build out some of the data aspects on top.
I like the sound of this one. For me, straight away, it would be thinking about legacy, thinking about what happens with that data after the person who's collected it has used it. And that comes from an experience of working a lot in short-term projects, or being the person in charge of data, or the volunteer in charge of data. So building data usage and data protection into your digital strategy would be the one thing from my experience that's needed. What do you think, Dulcie?
I think that's a great answer, and I think that's true not even just in the data domain, but I think in all domains where you work, it's always good to kind of consider your legacy. What's the biggest gap for heritage organizations? I think just, I think that there's, as is often the case in all organizations that we work with, there's a sort of sense that surely the data we have can be useful. We get that a lot, like, surely we have a lot of data, it must be useful for something. And I would encourage you to go back and think, sort of dream big, think about what challenge it is that you're trying to overcome. You know, maybe you want everybody to, you know, have a full understanding of a particular aspect of cultural heritage, or maybe you want everybody to, you know, have exposure to a kind of citizen science project. I think thinking about what the challenge is that you're facing organizationally is the thing that people find the hardest step in the data process. Once you get clarity there and clarity in your own thinking about what you're hoping to achieve, it's often quite easy to guide people into the right sort of data collection tools.
Mm. Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to that as well from my perspective. Often our hunches are right in terms of what we do, but they're not always right. And I'll give a sort of non-heritage example here, but it's a very charity digital example here. And we used to find that our traffic dipped alarmingly in the summer and at Christmas. And the question there was that because people weren't interested in what we were publishing, because they were all off on holiday doing other things, or was it for different reasons? And we actually found out that when we increased our content in those time periods, that our readership went up. So what was actually happening was, because we were assuming it was going to be quiet, we had less activity, and therefore it was more quiet. So it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. So hunch is often right, but sometimes you need to go and check the data and you find out that your assumptions are wrong. So that's my perspective on that one. Let's keep moving along. So yeah, we talked about quite a number of different tools, Dulcie. I think you've already called out those which are free anyway, and obviously the open source tools are free as well. So in particular, the question is: are open use tools as user friendly? You know, particularly if you've got a charity, a heritage organisation, where the staff and volunteers are not very digitally savvy, they might not find it very easy to access and use these tools.
Yeah, I think definitely the coding tools like R and Python have a higher learning curve. They tend to be a bit more powerful, like you can do more with them, but I've seen a lot of amazing work done with Google Sheets or a Power BI dashboard, so I think there's no problem there. There's a lot of the advantage of the kind of open source community is that there's a lot of free training out there at all levels, and I can certainly share some of my favorites. And there's also really good kind of communities, whether that's on a website or like there's Slack workspaces and that kind of thing, with people who will help you with a very specific problem. So although with those tools, there's definitely a kind of higher or steeper learning curve, there's also a lot of support out there. In terms of the kind of dashboarding tools that I mentioned, again, there's a lot of free training videos out there. And I would say that if you are using one of these tools and you're having trouble with anything, like that is ripe material for our office hours. And if we can't help you, I think we'll know the person to point you to, but you're welcome to get in touch and we can find someone to help you out with that. Good.
That's very timely. There was a comment in the chat as well, actually, about training tools and resources. So thanks for mentioning that. A few questions on the subject of fundraising. I'm going to take this one to Carmen first. What data would benefit my organisation if I'm applying to the Heritage Fund?
Certainly, if you are an organisation that has visitors or audiences or engages with visitors and audiences, knowing who is currently doing that and perhaps how, if you can, is fantastic information to get in there. I would really recommend the Audience Agency, and they have a free level of audience analysis that you can do with them, and they have introduced a digital audience element into that. And where those who are engaging with your organisation, where they are, and elements of demographic are all really useful data to show kind of who is using you and who wants to use you, if that is how people interact with the organisation. So that's very broad, but I will add some links into this after the chat.
Yeah, okay, that's great. And just actually taking that theme a little bit further, slightly different aspect of working with funders is in terms of actually reporting to them as well. So again, I think this is another one for you, Carmen. What kind of data do the funders actually like to receive in their reporting?
Well, then again, they want to know, where are the people that are engaging with you? How many of them engaged? At what level? So going a little bit further than the initial information you might put in a funding bid. And that's in terms of digital engagement, quite easy to get with Google Analytics. I've certainly used that a lot in the past to pull in that information. And the in-house analytics tools when you're thinking about social media, so using kind of Facebook, Instagram's tools that they have in there if you have a business account with them, which is free to have.
Good. So there's now a slightly more general question about fundraising as well. So I'm going to assume that this related to maybe getting funds from the public as well as from grant givers as well. So the question is, this is a startup charity. So they're just getting used to data. What is the best way to use data for fundraising, and how should data differ from users and volunteers? Maybe go to you on this first, Dulcie.
So yeah, the question is like how to use data for fundraising. I guess there's a few different ways that you could approach it, and I would encourage you to, since you're at this early stage, think about using data not just for fundraising but throughout the organization. Sounds like you are already. I think you can look at things very simply, like what the demographics are of your donors. We also, when we're looking at fundraising data, we tend to look at things like how long, like what a typical donor journey is. So how long a donor tends to donate, what their typical monthly donation might be, how, like whether they're a donor for several years, or what the kind of attrition rate might be, and also looking at overlaps, so like whether your donors are also your visitors. That kind of thing can be really helpful as a starting point.
Okay, brilliant. Now, just a time check, because we've still got quite a few questions left, which we'd like to keep working through. I know that Dulcie and Carmen are able to stay online a little bit longer. So if any of you still want to stay online, we're going to keep going with the questions. We will also continue recording these, so the whole thing will be available. If you've obviously got to dash off because you've got other commitments as well, then totally understand that. So keeping going on the questions, hang on, just got my chat box is actually in the way. Chat bot is in the way of my Q&A screen. So there was a question about Google Analytics. Was there a reason, Dulcie, why you didn't recommend Google Analytics?
No, in fact, I intended to. So good catch there. Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure Google Analytics is incredibly useful to many people here. And I think I was just including it in the sort of suite of Google tools and forgot the icon. So yeah, absolutely. Google Analytics can be really useful for looking at like social media and how your website traffic is doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we use Google Analytics quite a lot ourselves at Charity Digital. It does have shortcomings. So if you want to get into some of the kind of types of audience segmentation Dulcie's talking about, depending on what that segmentation is, it doesn't always support it. So it's a great place to start, though, and it is free. So there are some real benefits in that. question for Carmen here. As I was saying, tools that Dulcie's recommended are great, but does Carmen have any additional tools she's found useful on projects?
Again, I don't seem to be plugging the audience agency here, but I've used, they're just really helpful. They have a lot of content on there. Not necessarily a tool, but a place to go for other resources. Obviously with Heritage Digital, we'll be producing various resources on data and things like customer relationship management systems, but that's to come. But for now, there's Culture Hive, where you can search for resources on tools. And I noticed there's another question about survey questions. There's something on Culture Hive for that I'll link to. I'm a big fan of Google Analytics myself. I'll have a think about any other additional tools that I can think of for audience and kind of social engagement. So maybe I'll come back to that and link to them.
Okay, good. So there's a question here about how much data to collect. So should we be collecting as much data as possible from our audiences to understand every aspect of them, or only focus data collection on the goals and challenges we have? It's Dulcie, one for you, I think.
Yeah, so I think it's iterative. So I think you should collect the data that you think will be useful to answer your questions. Partly this is important from a GDPR perspective, because you actually, when you're collecting people's information, you have to have a valid use case for that data. And more is not necessarily better. More brings all sorts of problems in terms of data quality issues, and when you have more things collected, there's probably going to be more things missing. So I would start with framing your challenges and questions, and recognize that those questions and challenges might change in 5 years.
Mm-hmm. And I guess building on that, how do you glean the robustness of your data? Do the recommended tools account for mitigating or missing elements?
So yeah, that's a big question. I'll do my best to kind of address it in the time that we have. Certainly as a first pass, it can be useful to look at things like how much of your data is missing. And if you can try to understand whether that's because people didn't answer, or like because they didn't know, or because they just didn't want to answer, if you can kind of ascertain that. One thing that can be, in terms of understanding the sort of robustness of your data, one thing to do is to maybe look at half your data now, and then look at a different half in the future, and see if the same findings come out in both those data sets. So like, take a segment of your data, do some analysis, see what you find, and then take another kind of random segment of your data and see if the same things hold true. If you can replicate your findings, that's usually an indication that they're fairly robust. And then the third thing that I would suggest is trying different approaches. So there's often, there's pretty much always more than one way to solve a problem. But if two different approaches can lead you to the same answer, again, that is some indication that you're probably onto something.
Yeah, good. A question from Bev, which I think this is for Carmen. In addition to surveying your own visitors online and on site, can you suggest the best sources of information and data on how virtual tours and new emerging digital technologies are being used and received by customers across the UK cultural sector?
It's a really interesting and really pertinent question to now. The first place I would recommend in terms of visitor attraction data is the Association of Leading Visitor Attractions, and all of the amazing survey data they've been putting out over the lockdown around kind of responses to COVID and what visitors are going to be expecting and what they would like to be interacting with. And there are some elements in there about digital technologies. There has also been the NMDC, I believe, have put out a similar report that has perhaps slightly more about digital technologies in museums and the expectations around that, and wearables or touchables, and whether people will want to interact with them. And finally, I've left them to last, the audience agency Bounce Forward programme will help organisations to look at where their audience pivot to online and digital engagement has gone.
Okay, good. Thank you. Question from Anna. This is probably one for you, Dulcie. Can you recommend any MOOC courses to learn more about getting started with data science? And I've got to confess, I don't know what an MOOC course is. So if you could explain that, that'd be helpful as well.
Sure. I think they're colloquially known as MOOCs. They're like, so the MOOC stands for Massive Open Online Courses. And basically they're free online courses that are offered sometimes in partnership with universities and sometimes by other organizations. So one thing that I'll link to that's not actually a MOOC, but is a useful set of webinars by one of our kind of partner organizations, Coalition for Efficiency, is their learning labs. So right now, those are all free to everybody. I think normally they're for people involved in their program, but they have webinars on things like getting the most out of qualitative data, getting the most out of survey design, and some kind of data, very sort of basic data essentials. So that those are useful. In terms of getting started in like more data analytics, I can share some as well, but there's lots on kind of Coursera is a good option, and edX. Udacity also have some, but I think this might just sound like I'm saying names. So maybe I think I'll just share some links with you afterwards.
That's brilliant. That's really helpful. Question from Philip. Would a local government heritage service be able to access pro bono support for data analysis? So that's both for kind of DataKind and or any of the others you mentioned as well.
Yeah, so for us, like local government is fair game, charities, community interest companies, social enterprises. Essentially, we're just not able to support private sector companies who would be in the position to hire data science consultants, because we don't want to put those folks out of work. But definitely get in touch, and we can go from there.
Yeah, brilliant. Question from Catherine on data sources. Do you have any tips for data gathering? I recently joined a small organization that wants to survey its members, about 150 of them, develop their offering and support development ahead of a membership drive. In the past, they had limited responses from members. And in the couple of events they've run since she joined, non-member engagement has actually been higher than member engagement.
So is the question basically, how can I get people to answer my survey?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. This is tricky, and I was talking to somebody this morning about this exact issue. I think you have to recognize that when you send out a survey, you have about a week, I would say, window maybe where people will answer it. And after that, I think you can assume that people won't answer it. If you have the capacity to incentivize your survey, I've seen folks, give a £5 cost a gift card or something. That can be one strategy. I think it's tricky. Timing matters. So I think if you could avoid sending it during August holidays, then you probably will get more responses. And then I guess kind of just getting buy-in, explaining what you're going to get out of this and how it's going to benefit them in the end. Think about what would motivate you to click on something, and just don't make it too long as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big ones, isn't it? There's always this trade-off. The longer people perceive the survey to be, the less likely they are to complete it. And it kind of links to a question from Ben. If you're new to data collection, you may be just trying to start off with a relatively small data set. What are the key questions to actually ask your audience to start off with?
Again, I would encourage you to think about like what you would want to show. So we, for example, I mean, we work with a lot of kind of service delivery organizations, and they wanted to be able to write a report on the number of palliative care nurses that were working in different parts of the organization. So sometimes it can be helpful to almost kind of sketch the report that you want to end up with, and then you can figure out what questions you need to answer that. But I think like one tip would just be, you know, make sure that your questions are single questions and not kind of double-barreled questions. And I'll post a link as well to the Designing Surveys webinar from Coalition for Efficiency, which I think will be really helpful in this case.
Yeah. Okay, and going back to social media, want to measure the impact of a social media campaign across all channels. So this is, we're looking at LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. The question is, could I use a free web page or app to measure this?
I think so. I'm going to have to go back and get a bit more, check in on the best answer to this. The strategy that I can tell you that most people use in trying to measure the impact of a social media campaign is what's known as A/B testing. So in this, what you can do is basically give one half of your, you know, one half of the people who visit your website one view or one social media campaign, and then the other half the other campaign, and see if there's a difference in like number of clicks or read-through rates, that kind of thing. Whether there's an actual, what the best tools are for doing that, that might be free, I can get back to you on that, and whether you can do that within Google Analytics, I'd have to check.
Good. Okay, so I'm just looking at the question. So what we'll do on the free tools, we'll repeat those in the links, and Carmen will repeat all of the sources you've mentioned, like the audience, visitor attraction data. We'll ensure that those are mentioned in the links as well. I think we did talk about digitally excluded people before. I don't know if any of you've got, I guess the question here is just to double check, how do we make sure we're understanding the needs of digitally excluded people if we're relying on surveys in particular, which, you know, we tend to send out using things like SurveyMonkey or Typeform, and they can't complete them? How do we actually ensure that we're getting their responses and understanding their views?
I can give two suggestions. So one, I can share in the resources, there's a open map on digital exclusion. It's an open data set that can give you an estimate of the extent of digital exclusion within your region. So if you're working within a particular part of the UK, that might be helpful. If you're a very small organization, one thing that you could try is seeing who amongst your membership has an email address listed on file, and that could be a clue as to whether or not you're reaching them. But that, I think, is only really practical if you're quite small.
Brilliant. That's very helpful. Good. Well, I'm pleased to say we've got through all of the questions. So thank you both to Dulcie and Carmen for that. It's really, really helpful. I don't know if either of you like to say a last few words, Carmen in particular, from the heritage perspective.
I would mainly like to say, if you are a Facebook user and you're interested in talking more offline after this discussion, we have set up a closed Facebook group for Heritage Digital. It's facebook.com/groups/Heritage Digital, which we will also share. You can ask further questions, and we'll also post the links and any forthcoming events in there too. Brilliant.
Thanks, Carmen. And Dulcie, any kind of last tips for people, maybe to get them started?
I think the question that I would encourage you to think about is, what would make my life easier? And then maybe you can think about how to use data to get there. Yeah, I would just say, feel free to get in touch if you have any questions for us. We have a really big community of volunteer experts, and we'd be happy to find somebody suitable to help you out.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you very much, Dulcie, and thank you very much, Carmen. We've had a really fascinating webinar there. We've covered a massive amount of content. Data is a subject we plan to revisit again, and hopefully being a bit corny here, to actually mine in a bit more detail as well, because I think you'll all have seen it's a very broad topic as well. In terms of the Heritage Digital Programme, we get a little quieter now through the midsummer, so we haven't got any more webinars planned until the September time, but we will be keeping the flow of useful resources that we find going, and we'll be publishing those online on our website. And if you want to stay informed of that, then obviously keep in touch with us, register, and we'll send you through details as well. And as I mentioned before, we should be getting the survey sent through to get your views very shortly as well. So thank you very much for joining us today. Hope to speak to you again soon. Bye.